So let's take a look at just what's winning in this new Pariah Nexus world, with an overview of 10 top army lists that have gone undefeated in tournaments since 40k's big rules update. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking army lists. It's now been almost 2 weeks since Games Workshop dropped the last balance data slate and points updates on us, and now events and tournaments have been adapting to the new missions and the rules changes for each faction, and with that in mind I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what's been doing well. So far, as before, game balance is at least looking relatively good for the majority of the armies, a huge amount of factions performing well and winning games. It's interesting to see what the best players around are taking in their army lists, some of which is kind of similar to before, though there definitely looks like there's some big changes depending on both faction or game-wide rules. In this one I'm just going to take a look at 10 lists that went undefeated, maybe skewing towards the slightly bigger tournaments of last weekend, and having a look at what choices were taken by the best players around. First up, despite a few big nerfs, Necrons still managed to go undefeated this weekend. This list by David Leniewski took second at Glasshammer GT, going undefeated, 6 wins and no losses in a big tournament of 168 players. I'm certainly not too surprised to see Hypercrypt Legion here rather than Canoptech Court, given the big points increases they had, but it's interesting that it's quite such a Catan-heavy Hypercrypt Legion, given that there was a specific nerf to that. They're no longer able to use the Cosmic Precision stratagem for the 3-inch Deep Strike, though I guess that means that you can save that rather good stratagem for any of the other units in the list that you need to be able to score. The list is basically 4 Catan, 1 Tesseract Vault, and then a whole bunch of small scoring units, looking pretty ideal for warping around the table, doing actions and things. The list is led by 2 Hexmark Destroyers, one's a Warlord with the Dimensional Overseer. They're nice deep striking lone operatives that could be hard to catch up with, and Dimensional Overseer allows more units to return to Hyperphase. They're here along with 3 squads of 5 Death Marks, which are nice cheap deep striking units to be able to drop down and do actions or score points and things, and genuinely don't have terrible damage output for their cost either. And 2 individual Locust Heavy Destroyers, one with an Emetic Exterminator and one with Gauss. Between those 7 units, you can have things repeatedly managing to deep strike wherever they want to. If you went heavy on the 3-inch drop stratagem, you could have things repeatedly dropping into the enemy backfield for behind enemy lines and the Locust objective. Seems about as guaranteed to score high on secondaries as virtually any army in the game. The Catan will still definitely be able to use the Hypercrypt Legion by warping up to the front lines, and it's still pretty good just to drop them 9 inches away, to make sure they will be a problem pretty much immediately, even if they can't 3-inch drop. The Nightbringer and Void Dragon might have to push more centrally for objectives and stay on the board a bit more, or drop around on the flanks. The Transcendent Catan have much more choice with their Deep Strike rule. Finally, there's the enormous Tesseract Vault, which is kind of interesting. It can use a few of the stratagems that the detachment has, and I guess that could be an enormous threat that you could Cosmic Precision if you really wanted to. A great big tough super heavy with a bunch of anti-horde shooting and some cool Catan powers. And I feel like you'd struggle to kill it when the rest of the army is trying to deal with those incredibly tough Catan as well. Overall, looks absolutely terrifying to fight. Looks like it'd win the overall damage game against most armies and score really high on secondaries. It maybe just doesn't have quite as much objective control for primary objectives and things, so it certainly needs to try and take apart the enemy army in short order and make sure they're not outscored too heavily there, but obviously seems to have worked. Overall looks pretty terrifying, and interesting that Necrons can viably pivot back to Catan spam if they want to. Next up, and first at the same tournament, are Chaos Space Marines, some Renegade Raiders played by Josh Roberts, again going 6 wins and no losses. Chaos Marines did get hit fairly hard with a whole bunch of points increases in the last update, but looks like they're not out of the running yet. The changes to Warp Talons between the points increase and Renegade Raiders no longer being able to guarantee return them to reserves does seem to have put them out of consideration for this one though. Renegade Raiders is the most commonly played Chaos Space Marine competitive detachment, giving everything the assault keyword and extra AP against things on objectives, which is pretty nice, and also has an Armour of Contempt stratagem, lots of good transport support, and the ability to advance and charge for 1 CP. Probably the most notable thing about this one though is the sheer amount of Rubric Marines here. They work really great with the detachment core rule. They get extra AP against things on objectives and also get to reroll wound rolls with those Warp Flamers and Soul Reaper cannons against things on objectives as well. And also the assault keyword can help get those Warp Flamers in range too. In this detachment, these guys are just absolutely god tier objective clearers. Otherwise, there's a whole load of scary chaos things packed into transport. There's 3 Chaos Lords with Demon Hammer and Plasma Pistol, one of which taking Dread Reaver for some rerolls when they're near to the enemy deployment zone. They can make either Legionary or Chosen squads punch up extra hard, and they've got 3 squads of Chaos Legionaries with Chainswords and heavy melee weapons, and 2 squads of 5 Chosen with Fists and Lightning Claws as options to join, and then between them and the Rubik Marines, there's 3 Chaos Rhinos that have the option to transport them in some combination. I'm not sure which ones get the nod and which ones get to foot slog. Otherwise, there's a unit of 10 Cultists to put sticky objectives down, 2 Chaos Vindicators that also work really well with this detachment, being able to advance and shoot and get extra AP on objectives, and Cypher as an annoying lone operative who has a surprising amount of damage output against elite infantry. There's also 1 small squad of Nurglings as well to do a little bit of mid-board screening, even if they aren't as useful for missions as they were before. Overall feels like fairly standard good Chaos stuff, but then just really highlighting just how much Rubik Marines get out of the Renegade Raiders detachment with all the extra damage they have and some good stratagems to support them in transports. Next up for the Black Templars, we've got a Righteous Crusaders list by Matthew Alley, who used this one to take first at Wargames Con, going 6-0 undefeated in a big tournament of 118 players. This one seems to be going pretty much all in on Crusaders melee rush, Righteous Crusaders being the detachment where you get to choose the Templar vows. Often people tend to go for the 6+ feel no pain on everything, and it has some nice stratagems to allow you to flex into the different vows as needed, extra melee in combat, and a few other nice supporting melee type things. For the core elites of the list, there's a big squad of 10 Sword Brethren, and then another 2 further squads of 5 of them, all of which take the Thunderhammers, Lightning Claws and Pyre Pistols. I'd guess the squad of 10 would most likely ride in the Land Raider, though I'm not sure exactly which characters would attach in what combination. There's 4 great characters to attach to those squads: Helbrecht, an Emperor's Champion, a Judaseer and a Lieutenant. I guess from the setup of those, Helbrecht and the Lieutenant would need to go in the same squad, though whether or not they're just making the primary block of 10 of them into an absolute ridiculous danger unit that kills literally anything in the game, or whether they're doing that to a smaller 5-man squad, I don't know. Helbrecht can get the Sword Brethren's damage buff on his own sweep attack to give him some ridiculous amounts of damage to things when he needs it, and with the combination of lethal hits from the Lieutenant and the Templar Vow type stratagems, basically such a unit destroys pretty much everything up to Titans in the game. The Lieutenant takes Perdition's Edge to give him a little bit more strength and AP in melee as well. Otherwise, there's a Judaseer with Sigismund's Seal, that to give the squad fights first, so it makes sense for him not to be in the Land Raider really. And then there's also the Emperor's Champion, who's just really quite cheap and very fighty, and again profits from the extra damage that the Sword Brethren can get. Basically anything that any of those units touch is going to take some absolutely massive damage. I think you'd have to use terrain fairly smartly to get them there though. Otherwise, beyond all that, there's a big unit of 10 Assault Terminators as the absolutely massive threat for the list. They'll take Thunderhammers and Storm Shields to have 4 wounds each, and Devastating Wound Thunderhammers, which means that if they activate Anti-Psych of 4+ as one of the vows, which they can for 1 CP, you could have Devastating Wounds on a 4+ for them potentially. And they're led into battle by a Terminator Ancient with a Thunderhammer and Storm Shield himself, and also the Turnhouse's Bones. If you use the Feel No Pain type vow, that means that they'll have a 5+ Feel No Pain. They're a pretty hilariously threatening unit. I guess they're probably going to be trying to get there with Rapid Ingress. Finally, there's 3 units of 5 Jump Intercessors, which could bounce around the board scoring objectives and doing actions and things, and still certainly bully lighter infantry units, and a Combi Weapon Lieutenant, who's pretty tough and hard to catch up with for a lone operative. Maybe could be an option for doing some actions and things, or holding down a home objective in missions where it matters. Overall, looks like a pretty fun and hilariously destructive list there. Just massive full-on melee Black Templars, where if anything catches you, then bad things happen. Feels like you would need to play pretty carefully with it though. You really couldn't be affording to lose those expensive Sword Brethren squads for no good return. Next up and second at the same tournament is this Tau Empire Montcar list, this one by Justin Moore, who used it to take second. Again, going 6 wins to no losses. This one doesn't really look too enormously different to lists prior to the data slate. Montcar gives you lethal hits when guided, so it's quite nice for any mid-strength things, like say the Ghost Kills, Riptides, or Breacher teams perhaps, and also the Assault keywords to get the firepower where it's needed very quickly. For moving up the board and fighting for midfield objectives early, there's 3 units of 10 Breachers, 2 of them in Devilfish, and 2 of them also accompanied by Cadra Fireblades as well. They can stack big damage on literally anything in the game when supported by stratagems and guiding. Montcar can also allow them their big rerolls even if things aren't on objectives, which is quite nice reliability. Then there's an Enforcer Crisis Commander that went down a little bit alongside some Sunforged suits in the last update, so they'll be able to drop in and lay some big damage on enemy armor with their built-in rerolls. The Sunforged suits take 3 shield drones, 2 gun drones and a marker drone. Then there's a lot of symmetrical pairs of things, 2 Ghost Kills with Ion Rakers and Fusion Blasters, nice tanky lone operatives that can inflict a bit of damage and be fairly guaranteed to survive into the late game, nice for screening out the deployment zone a bit as well. 2 hammerheads with railguns and smart missiles for some long-range anti-tank damage. Looks like there wasn't any swapping to broadsides for this one. 2 piranhas with seeker missiles and fusion blasters. Quite nice early scouting and annoyance units to get in the way. Plus the seeker missile alpha strike is pretty nice for the cost. 2 riptides with ion accelerators that really quite like the Montcar buffs, and the ability to fall back and shoot makes them a bit better for skirmishing in the midboard. They're a bit tougher than most Tau units as well. And finally 2 sets of 3 stealth suits for guiding purposes. They could be potentially good units to do some things like actions as well. Overall looks like a pretty terrifying example of Montcar. A serious amount of firepower between all this, with all of the ion shots and breach shots with lethal hits, plus a few anti-tank dedicated units with the hammerheads and some forged to take down the toughest stuff. I guess the list would have got a bit of a side grade in the update. Hammerheads going up a bit, but Enforcers and Crisis going down a bit. Next up, for the noble households of the Imperial Knights, we've got this list by a William Furriman, who used it to take first at Salzburg Major Alpine Cup, with 5 games and 5 wins in a medium-sized tournament of 60-odd players. Knights got some pretty big advantages in the last balance update. The big Knights being able to basically walk straight through ruin walls and things was a huge advantage to them. It means it's a fair bit harder trying to keep them contained in any way, and they should be able to bring their might to bear. Plus they had some handy points cuts to things that were already fairly good, like the Atropos and Lancer, both of which are here. Though I guess they might still get on with actions a little bit worse than some armies, even with the exceptions for Titanic characters that they have. In any case, this list has Canis Rex, the Atropos and the Lancer. Canis Rex being basically auto-include as the standout best big knight. He just has slightly more damage than most of them and better defense, and his stratagem rule got a lot better, being able to access things like tank shock or rotate ion shields now. The Atropos is the sort of anti-Titanic knight. It gets the improved Cerastus chassis, a 5+ invulnerable save that works in close combat, and a couple of fairly good guns that get +1 to hit against monsters and vehicles. Overall, it does seem like one of the better value ones for 425 points. Then the Knight's Lancer moves very fast at 14 inches, has an invulnerable save and free tank shock. I guess it went down in points, but the tank shock did get a little bit less impactful. It can also allow you to advance and charge armigers, which is pretty big too, and there's 4 of them in this list, 4 warglaves armed with heavy stubbers. Nice outriders that could be doing actions and perhaps absorb the brunt of the enemy damage rather than the big knights, and they go on very very well with the lay low the tyrants built-in rerolls that knights get. Finally, there's an Eversaw Assassin, a cheap fast lone operative that can be quite nice for actions and objective type things. For knights, it's just generally nice to have at least some units that aren't 140 points or more. In any case, nice to see knights doing well. They hadn't been having quite as much success at tournaments recently. It did feel like the update was good for them though, with walking through walls being a thing and Canis Rex's stratagems getting a direct improvement on one of their best datasheets. Next up, we've got some new sisters with the Adepta Sororitas Bringers of Flame. This list by Scott Ketchum took first at Battle for the Capital, going 5-0 at a 58-player tournament. The detachment used is the Bringers of Flame one, which looks like it's shaping up to be the one that's played most competitively. Just very direct boosts to being able to get close with their close range shooting and hit extra hard when they get there. It's also the one that, kind of similar to the Space Marines Firestorm, has a bunch of helpful options with transports. A bunch of their stratagems relate to them, and there's 3 immolators here to transport some scary melter goodness about. Those immolators all take twin multi-melters, so they'll be strength 10 when they're fairly close, which is nice enough in itself, and it looks like they're transporting Dominions around. One squad takes full-on melter guns, and one takes 4 flamers and a hand flamer, and the Dominions mean that the transports will be able to scout move their way up the board and get all that melter and nastiness into place early. I guess possibly attached to the melter squad, there's a Dialogus and a Palatine. The Dialogus means that you can change a dice to a 6, and the Palatine's lethal hits can mean that that squad could hit ridiculously hard. The Palatine also has Righteous Rage, so an option to discard some miracle dice to make her extra fighty in close combat if she needs to be. Otherwise, there's a squad of Sisters Novitiate who can infiltrate now. Quite nice to screen out the midboard and make sure that all those vehicles can scout up if they want to. There's then 2 units of the now very expensive Paragon Warsuits with Warblades and Multi-Melters. They get +1 to hit and wound against vehicles, so are pretty much death incarnate to things like knights and tanks, and Morven Val's here to join one of them, again with her upgraded damage output, though they do cost an awful lot of points. I maybe wouldn't be too surprised if it was the plan of one of those squads to rapid ingress. They're ridiculously dangerous, but their main issue is their chance of getting destroyed before they get to inflict their damage. Otherwise, there's the Triumph of St. Catherine being a big force multiplier, usually in the middle of the board, all sorts of buffs on offer, and also the ability to get an automatic 6 miracle dice each turn, which is massive in itself. A jump canoness leading a squad of 5 Seraphim, which even with just a few hand flamers can still be pretty devastating in this detachment. She can make the torrent weapons get devastating wounds, and they already hit quite hard to start with given that they're strength 5 in this detachment basically. She also has a Blessed Halberd and can fight alright in close combat, plus the Iron Surplus relic to increase her durability. Finally, there's 2 Castigator tanks at 150 points, just one of the more efficient datasheets in the Codex full stop. One takes the usually more popular battle cannon and one takes the auto cannon. I guess maybe the auto cannon might be a little bit more tempting in Bringers of Flame with the emphasis on getting close. Being able to advance and shoot either way is pretty big though. Overall, it's pretty fun and punchy and hard hitting. I must admit, doesn't look like the most durable list in the world, but I feel like that's probably going to be the Sisters of Battle in general. Lots of cool damage combos and datasheet rules that can have them hitting spectacularly hard, but for their points cost, pretty much nothing here is particularly tough. Cool to see them doing well though. Looks like Games Workshop have struck the balance okay. Sisters look like they've been performing pretty well on their first weekend, and taking home a fairly big tournament win seems to be a good sign for them as well. Next up, we've got a victory for the Blood Angels and the Sons of Sanguinius detachment. This list was run by John Stewart, aka Blood Angels Commander on YouTube. He took first at the PKH XBAC 40K GT, going 5 wins undefeated at a 33-player grand tournament. He was kind enough to reach out to share a few details about the army list with me, which was very cool. And he says he'll apparently have a full review video on the BA Commander channel later in the week. I'll leave a link to that down in the video description if you'd like to subscribe to check that out when it appears. In any case, it was pretty cool to see a slightly off-meta take for the Sons of Sanguinius manage to win pretty big like this. I feel like for this one there's a bunch of things that you would expect in an army like this, and then a whole bunch of things that you might not. The list does take along a few shooting gun turrets, 2 Predator Destructors with las cannon sponsons and a Ballistus Dreadnought, and then some slightly less traditional things for the main damage punch. Leading the list is Commander Dante himself, backing up a big squad of Sanguinary Guard with Inferno pistols. Obviously they hit like an absolute truck, particularly with the Red Rampage stratagem if it's needed, but they are a fairly massive points investment and very fragile when they get hit back. Apparently the game plan was to rapid ingress them every game, and obviously that seems to have worked out well. Otherwise, there's a captain with Power Fist with some company heroes in an Impulsor. Interesting to see the change away from Assault Intercessors there, which I've seen a lot of people using instead. It means you might not have quite as many volume of attack re-rolling chainsword hits, but the unit is quite a lot tankier for the extra 20 points with the 4 wounds and the -1 to wound thing they have going on. Then there's 2 units of Jump Intercessors with Power Fist and Plasma Pistols, good for doing secondary objectives and skirmishing with lighter infantry. 2 units of 5 Death Company with Inferno Pistol and Power Fists. They're led by Jump Chaplains with Power Fists as well. And again, they're hilariously dangerous but very, very fragile units, absolutely needing to get some big kills in before they get shot down. Then finally, for some further objective support, there's 5 Infiltrators that look like they'd guard the home field, some Scouts to start and screen out the midfield, and then interestingly 2 units of Outriders, which don't tend to get played in competitive quite as much, which apparently were partly wanting to use them just to use the models which hadn't seen outings in that long. They still bring a fair few good chainsword attacks, even if I do feel like point for point they're not quite on the same level as Jump Intercessors are, with the fly keyword and the extra threat that they bring. Really cool to see the Blood Angels still doing pretty great, and particularly with a slightly non-standard way to run the detachment, which is fun. Talking of non-meta things, perhaps one of the most interesting and surprising results of the past weekend were Custodes winning a grand tournament with the Null Maiden Task Force of all things, generally considered to be perhaps the single weakest of all of the Custodes detachment by many. It does look like, for people playing them in competitive, the extreme vast majority have been using Shield Host, so it is kind of hilarious that Null Maidens are the ones that see the success. The list was run by John Camacho, who used it to take first at Field of Flames GT, a 32-player event. It does have a couple of Caladius tanks, a Telemon Heavy Dreadnought, and Canis Rex to do a bit of heavy lifting, but beyond that it is genuinely playing into the Sisters of Silence theme of the army. Their detachment allows you to do some battle shock things and have a few damage buffs for some of the units that do generally seem to work best on Vigilators. There's 2 units of 9 of them here, plus 2 units of 4 Witch Seekers with the Flamers, and then 3 sets of 4 Prosecutors with the Bolters for scoring and things. It looks like one of the squads of Vigilators is led by Alea with the fights first, and then there's a Knight Centauro with the Huntress's Eye, which probably goes with the other one. Those Caladius tanks are pretty efficient anti-tank with their Agnes heavy blaze cannons. The Telemon Heavy Dreadnought hasn't been seen as much in competitive play, though it did get a points cut last time around. That one takes the Telemon Caestus and the Storm Cannon. Canis Rex is just a bit of a powerhouse wherever he is at the moment, and seems fine enough to include in most Imperial armies. And then finally, just to absolutely double down on the Anti-Psyker, there's a Calexus Assassin, perhaps one of the least played most commonly out of any of the Imperial Assassins. Overall, pretty crazy to have the success of winning a grand tournament with that detachment. I certainly think most people wouldn't have seen that one coming. I don't think this is going to usher in any sort of Normaiden meta though. I suspect that the vast majority of successful Custodes lists going forward will probably be mostly shield host. I think I'd primarily give this one to just great player skill. Next up, the Tyranids were one of the factions that got the most changes in the update, and this Vanguard Onslaught list was used by Innes Wilson to place first at Dumfries Gamers 40k Charity GT, going 5-0 against a 50-player tournament, and it does have quite a lot of units that did change kind of significantly in the update as well. One of the changes was that Morlocks and Trigons gained the Vanguard Invader keyword, so it means that you can use all the powerful mobility type things on some fairly serious monsters, when normally monsters will be just completely locked out of that. Being able to advance and charge is pretty big for their mobility, and the Morlocks could potentially return back into strategic reserve and potentially pop up and do their deep strike trick with a bunch of mortal wounds multiple times if they really wanted to. Otherwise, interesting to see the Swarm Lord here as well. He's still pretty pricey, but his melee damage got better with a +1 strength thing, plus they changed his stratagem debuff ability so it now goes off in an aura effect, and that is quite a big thing to have in the centre of the battlefield. That could be really disruptive for quite a lot of armies out there. There's Death Leaper doing his things in the midfield, along with a single Lictor that could do free rapid ingress, and 2 Neurolictors that became Synapse to push out the nastiness into the midboard. I'm guessing being screening lurkers in the backfield, there's a Biovore and Pyrovore. I guess you could potentially use the Pyrovore to be in strategic reserve and do actions and things. I'd guess maybe backfield screening type units. I was kind of interested to see if the Biovore would still see play despite the Spore Mines not doing actions. They can still be really quite interesting for board control. Now it's a 50-point unit. The beast itself can do a bit of screening in your backfield, and then the Spore Mines could prevent deep strike or prevent advances and things, or just chip away at doing a little bit of indirect damage if it was absolutely critical. Then there's 2 units of very fast moving Hormagaunts for some swift move and charging objective control, if you needed to flip a primary objective maybe. 2 Exocrines with their newly improved Strength 9 firepower, and a Maleceptor for a bunch of Strength 10 damage 3 moving up the midboard. And then finally, perhaps the biggest and scariest unit out of any of them is a Neurotyrant with the Hunting Grounds enhancement. It looks like he's planning to lead up a big squad of 6 Zoanthropes. Neurotyrants are pretty great anyway, with their boost to the Shadow in the Warp as an OK Torrent Flamer attack. Hunting Grounds can disrupt reserves by making enemy reserves have to test Battle Shock. That could be very disruptive if they want to try and turn up and do objective things or use stratagems. But then if he is indeed joining that big unit of Zoanthropes, which is a new option post Data Slate, he can make all of their damage a lot nastier by giving them +1 to hit, maybe +1 to wound as well against Battle Shocked things, which Neurolictors could provide. And there's also an argument that he gives them big guns never tire as well, at least rules as written, so potentially ensures they're shooting against being locked up in close combat, though my guess is that Games Workshop probably aren't intending that. Not sure if it was played that way as per the tournament organisers' rules, but I think it works rules as written at the moment. Either way, it's a big scary psychic shooting battery that can certainly threaten big heavy stuff more so than most Tyranid units can. It's certainly really nice to see a victory with Tyranids though. They certainly were a faction that needed a good amount of help. And cool to see multiple things that changed in a fairly big way on the table here, perhaps implies that quite a lot of the changes were pretty impactful. Finally, Grey Knights still look like they're broadly doing well, in spite of a few points increases to things like Dread Knights. This list by Ruben Zhao was used to take first at Silicon Valley Grand Tournament, a 34-player event, and it's a mix of 30 Grey Knight infantry, plus 3 Librarians and 3 Dread Knights. The Dread Knights do cost a bit more now, but still are pretty much necessary for taking down enemy heavies, due to that heavy Psycannon firepower and good melee damage. They take the Great Hammer for extra tank busting in close combat, and they can move really fast across the board. The Brotherhood Librarians can chip in with a bunch of mortal wounds. I'm not too sure if they are heading up the Brotherhood Terminators. One takes the Sigil of Exigence, and they can be quite good individually just to drop in and do secondaries pretty much for guaranteed with a 3-inch deep strike stratagem. Looks like at least one's running solo, maybe more. Then there's 2 squads of Terminators, nice all-rounders to damage enemy infantry. A good focus is for the powerful Grey Knight stratagems like Mist of Deimos and things. 2 strike squads for battle line things and marking sticky objectives, which is always helpful. 1 unit of 5 fast-moving interceptors, and 1 5-man purgation squad with incinerators for a nice bit of focused anti-horde. Finally, there's a lone operative Eversaw assassin, nice enough to have as a fast-moving screening skirmisher that can do objectives. I'm not really too surprised to see Grey Knights continue doing well. Feels like they didn't really take the worst nerfs in the world, considering they were looking like one of the game's top factions prior to the update. In any case, I'll leave that there for this one. Let me know if you've got any thoughts as to the army lists or any insights as to how they were played as per normal. Look forward to hearing all your ideas and insights down in the comments. Certainly find it interesting to see how people are adapting their lists. If you enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep all the content coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.